wàhálà ojú agbára gada ayélujára ọ̀nà ti la àárín odò rèé kọjá ẹ̀rù òbodò odò ti ṣàn ẹ̀kún omi ṣàn títí ó já sí àárín ọ̀nà odò lóhùn lẹ̀gbọ́n ọ̀nà lóhùn lẹ̀gbọ́n a ti rìn a kò rí ẹni sọ fún wa bóyá odò lẹ̀gbọ́n tàbí ọ̀nà ní o odò láyé ẹ̀rù òbodò ọjọ́ ti pẹ́ tí Olódùmarè ọba adẹ́dàá tó dá òkè tó dá ọ̀nà tó dá odò sílé ayé odò láyé omi lènìyàn ẹ jẹ́ ká ṣe rere o ẹ̀rù òbodò.
Okay, so welcome to AbibitumiKasa Discussion series. Today we're very honored to be joined by Dr. Chukwunyere Kamalu, author of Person, Divinity, and Nature. But before we begin, we'd like to start the discussion today with a libation statement by Dr. Kambo.
Thank you.
So Dr. Campbell, are you with us?
Bajai.
So we'd like to go ahead and get started with the libation.
Yeah. Otum for Aradi, Chirum Ponkwami, Chirum Senior Mamma, Assassi, and Panyama, Assassi Audio Musama, and the Demifed, the Abosom, Yasomodos, and into me, Mobile Markbox, the Frabba, Coning from now. Or just Concontano. Or can say Yao. So you are respond by saying Yao.
No.
Yao.
Concontano. Brefatano. Tutano. SUGB. Waffle.
Yeah.
I couldn't do one something come near as a waffle. Munina. You.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Dr. Campbell, it looks like you're fading out a little bit. We can barely hear you.
Yes, it does seem to be fading out.
Yeah, Dr. Campbell. So it looks like we can barely hear you. So Dr. Kamalu, would you like to offer any opening statements along those lines yourself?
Only to say, in the name of our ancestors, as we have gathered here together and come safely from all our homes and our, last places of departure, may we also return home safely. And for all of the things that we have gathered here to consider, may we have the blessings and the guidance of the ancestors in our successful deliberations.
Ashe.
Ashe.
So thank you for that. So let me go ahead and read your bio, and thank you for sending me your bio, Dr. Kamalu. So Dr. Chukwunyere Kamalu is the author of several books on African philosophy and culture, including The Foundations of African Thought, 1990, Person, Divinity, and Nature, which we discussed today, 1998, The Little African History Book, 2007, The World at Face Value, 2012 and 2016. Chukwunyere has taught at the University of Reading, Black Studies and Social Psychology, University of the Arts, London, African Philosophy. He's also trained research arts scientist and civil engineer, currently acting as the chair of the Society of African Earth Scientists. He also works in professional capacity as a financial consultant for the past 20 years. And as
financial accountant. Financial accountant for the past 20 years as a math and science tutor in an African supplementary school since 2014. So, Dr. Kamalu, welcome to AbibitumiKasa. Thank you for joining us. So what I wanted to do, Dr. Kamalu, what we typically do is just, we don't have anything formal. We just like to have an open discussion about various topics that are very relevant to us today, especially this topic of African spirituality and African thought. So the way I was kind of introduced to your work was through Dr. Obadele Kambo's course, The Foundations of African Thought,
which I think I sent you a link, and I think you're very familiar with his work.
Oh, yeah.
So
yes, I've been watching that.
Yes, that's kind of how I got introduced to your work. So
right, yeah.
what I wanted to do is start off with an opening question, kind of, what was the inspiration, or what went into writing this book?
Well, I had written a book before called Foundations of African Thought, where I talked about the fundamental aspects of belief systems on the African continent.
Sure.
Basically, there was the observation that before African belief systems, African accounts of the beginning and so on, were seen as a kind of a jumble of disconnected myths without any kind of unity. So the book Foundations of African Thought took a kind of a view of Africa as a cultural unity rather than seeing kind of disparate ethnic peoples with disparate cosmologies, with have no connection with each other, and even no connection, historically or in any continual sense. So that and at the same time, African people were seen as atomized and disconnected from each other. So Foundations of African Thought basically went back into ancient African thought and saw that basically all of these African ideas and belief systems and so on were not really disconnected myths and so on, but could be seen as having belief systems which the common core could be seen in ancient African philosophy, namely that of Kemet, the ancient Egyptians. And through ancient Egyptian philosophy, one is able to view Africa as a cultural unity, and that's how Foundations of African Thought came about. And it was very much inspired when I first read John Mbiti's African Religions and Philosophy, and I was at that time living in Nigeria. I was doing my national service, and then also went on, I was working as a civil engineer, but at the same time I was researching into sort of African belief systems, having been introduced by John Mbiti's book. And from there, that's where the root of the idea for the book came. And so Person, Divinity, and Nature is merely a kind of a further establishment of the work that had been done in Foundations of African Thought. Has gone sort of into more depth about the belief systems and the African worldview, if you like.
Sure. So that's a great segue. Thank you for that. So I actually want to read a segment of the preface that you had, and it speaks directly to kind of what you just mentioned a little bit about the segmented views and how our African traditional systems are looked at as broken. So let me go ahead and start.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm getting a little feedback. So, okay, so it says the systematic study of African belief aims to give the reader more than a scramble of disconnected myths. Africa, viewed as a cultural unity in contrast to the anthropological works, which emphasize the idea of diversity of African cultures to the extreme. The result of this has been that ancient and traditional African worldview systems as a whole are seen as historically and geographically unconnected. That's a quote from your book in the preface. So what are some of the dangers or some of the impact that we understand when we are being looked at extremely emphasizing the differences rather than the cultural unities of our systems?
Well, it basically enables
us to be viewed as not having made or constructed any systems of thought or having achieved any construction of a culture and a higher civilization, basically, because it allows us to be seen as disparate from each other, for instance, whereas Europeans are quite easily able to claim that Greece is the sort of source of their higher civilization. It doesn't matter where the European is from, whether he's a northern Dane or whether he's Turkish or whether he's a swarthy Italian or a Viking blonde. Europeans in themselves are very diverse, yet they are able to still claim that, their sort of cultural heritage is in Greece. Now, because, we've been seen as disparate and segmented and so on, it's quite easy for European scholarship to portray Africa as not having any continuity, and therefore there's divisions between, West Africans and East Africans. They had this Hamitic hypothesis, so they've always tried to racially try to segment us. And in that way control us by actually, enabling the kind of idea of African cultural heritage to be kind of overturned, because you can't say, they'll say that, oh, well, you don't have any connection to the ancient Kemets, because the ancient Kemets are this type of African. And then they might say, the Bantus are a different type of African from, you know what I mean? So yes. I think that's a way of actually allowing us to just not be able to claim our cultural identity, basically, and to kind of work against that. I think you have to look at Africa as a cultural unity that basically, in the same way that Europeans look at Europe as a cultural unity. Do you know what I mean? They claim Greece. Doesn't matter where they're from. We claim Kemet. It doesn't matter whether we're from East Africa or from West Africa or from South Africa. That is part of our cultural heritage, I think. So that's basically the crux of the idea behind that.
Sure. It also goes along with Cheikh Anta Diop wrote a book called Cultural Unity. He talks about that cultural unity that we see, and he takes it beyond the cultural. As you know, he takes it to linguistics. Dr. Theophilo Benga, they take it to the linguistics, the scientific, the different areas that we have to look at outside of just the cultural things.
Absolutely, the cultural unity is a concrete reality. It's not just the kind of it's not just kind of a worldview. It's a concrete reality in terms of the connections linguistically, the connections even in terms of culturally, like when you look at myths of origin and popular myths in Africa. If you look at, for instance, there's a popular myth that shows that God in African belief systems, or the supreme being in African belief systems, is aloof in comparison to other cultures. So you have the myth where once earth and sky were together, and then they became separated, or where once God was close to the earth and then became either disenchanted or made to go away, so that there's this separation between earth and sky, between the noumenon and the phenomenon, between heaven and earth, if you like. There's this kind of dialectical separation that comes about, and this is seen in myths in different parts of Africa, in South Africa, in East Africa, in West Africa. You know, almost the exact same myth. There's, you know, a Shanti myth of a woman who pounded, you know, the corn in with the mortar and pestle, and used to pound it so hard that it would poke God in the eye, and God became fed up and therefore withdrew into the skies. You know, and then you know, there's the Egyptian idea of Shu and the Geb and Nut initially being united and then being later separated. So that, you know, there are several myths in from east to west to south, you know, all over Africa that have this common theme, and for the myths to be so similar and yet to be so disparate geographically, it just makes you think that yet there's something, there's a thread of commonality there, which basically is another example of what Diop is talking about linguistically. So there are all of these connections, so we have to explore them.
Sure. Yeah, and you touched on something linguistically, and I wanted to allude to another section of your book where you actually talk about that African religious systems cannot be neatly slotted into any categories defined by anthropologists and historians of religion. And you talked about using terminologies and language and how key it is to not try to explain African systems in Eurasian or European languages. Could you speak a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, well, that's because if you want to understand African philosophy or belief systems, it's essential basically that to understand that this philosophy is embedded within the language. So there are African philosophical words that they have no exact translation in European words. Rather, you might write a book about them to try to explain them, you know. Like, for instance, you know, I have, you know, now and again conversations with my children about their names and what they mean and so on. And within, you know, me being born from an Igbo culture, although I'm not a fluent Igbo speaker because I've obviously been brought up in Europe and so on, but I was born in Nigeria, and Igbo was my mother tongue. And Igbo being my mother tongue has basically meant that I at least have the confidence in understanding some of the roots of these words, like chi, you know, the names. Chi cannot be, it can't be translated by any European word. You rather have to write about chi to explain it. You know, Chukwu is an extension of chi. Chi, the great chi, that's what it means. And chi in Igbo philosophy is a kind of energy, but this energy exists within everything. It's within the trees, within, you know, within you, within the walls of your house. Chi is all, you know, is all around. But when you talk about Chukwu, then we talk about the great chi. This is the all-encompassing aspect. So there's an immanent aspect, which is within all things, and there's an external aspect, which is without all things. So that is just, those are just two words, chi and Chukwu. And if you take names, which basically are the source or the repository of a lot of African philosophy, is in the names that we give our children. If you wanted to learn African philosophy without having any books or anything, what you could do is to study the meanings of the names, and therein you would find virtually all of the philosophy of Africa, because within names we give our children, we've encapsulated very deep meaning of ontology, that is, I mean, the kind of beings and things that exist in the world, of you know, of being, of supreme being, of even, how we come to exist and how we are sustained in existence, because the names that we give for God, for instance, just in Igbo, I'm giving Igbo as an example because that's the language that I know of.
Sure.
They don't only describe things like the creator or the supreme being. They describe more than that. I mean, I'll give you an example. I often have conversations with my son about these names and these words. And there's a very kind of common misconception within the West, because some of these Igbo names are becoming known within the Western society. And so people might have heard of Chineke. Chineke is an Igbo word for the creator. Now, there's a misconception commonly that, Chineke means God. Chineke means the supreme being. But Igbo language, Igbo words are very, very specific about the meaning, because Chukwu is also a word that people use for God. Chineke is a word that people use for God. But that's because they've forgotten that actually these words are distinct. They have very, very particular meaning. And when you study the very particular meaning of these words, it will unravel the philosophy, the African philosophy that is behind them. So in just studying Chukwu and Chineke and trying to break down the names, because very often these names, they sound like one name, but actually they are multiple phrases made up, or they're more one or two words made up, or they're one or two concepts or elements or spirits or whatever. So Chineke means Chi na Eke, so Chi, we remember that Chi is this fundamental kind of spark which is within everything. People sometimes think about the Chinese Chi and say, oh, well, it sounds similar and so on and so on. And I can tell you that the concept is kind of like that. It's sort of about this energy which is immanent within all things. And when you say Chi na Eke, Eke is about, is a spirit like, it's a bit like Kepra in the an ancient Egyptian model. Kepra is a kind of being of becoming. Kepra enables the creation, is like a facilitator of the creation. Similarly, Eke is like a facilitator of the creation. Eke is also one of the names of the Igbo weeks. In the Igbo days of the week, there are 4 days of the week in ancient Igbo traditional ideas, cosmology, and Eke is one of the names that's been given to the days of the week. So Chi na Eke is talking about a very specific aspect of God or the Creator, because this Chi na Eke is talking about how there's a facilitator within the creation called Eke. And if you look at the words Eke and Chi, and you can relate them to ancient Egyptian words and to Dogon words, because Dogon words and ancient Egyptian words similarly describe creation words by this root K, which, so you find commonalities like that. So just to get to what Diop was saying about language, and there are these examples where you can see threads of commonality. Ke is very definitely a creative word in Igbo language which refers to creation, and sometimes it refers to organization, apportionment. It's like when you share out a cake, that is, or when you. And so they're very, very much related to this idea of the creation of the world, how it was organized, and so on. And this Ke root word is common in Igbo, it's common in Dogon, it's common in ancient Kemet. So I've just talked about Chineke. I haven't even talked about Chukwu. Well, I've talked about Chukwu. There are so many other variations of these names, like Olisa. Olisa is another word for God in Igbo philosophy. If I wanted to actually just give you an example of how African words, using the example of Igbo, encapsulate African philosophy, I will just talk about the words for God. So we've looked at Chukwu, it is a word for God. But I've shown you that Chukwu is distinct from Chineke, which is another word for God. But we've made this distinction that Chineke is actually the creation, or the facilitator, or the enabler of the creation. And then there's also Olisa. Olisa is quite closely related to the Yoruba Orisha. Yes. But Olisa in Igbo is originally another word for the creator. Yeah? And Orisha is the Yoruba. So you'll find that Yoruba words, Igbo words, can be quite close. But they divert in meaning, subtle diversions in meaning and so on. But it does all show that there is a link, that these cosmologies, these belief systems are not existing in kind of isolation and vacuums disconnected from each other. They're all connected, yeah. And I think that's what we have to explore. And through just my explaining Igbo names to my children, I'm kind of appreciating more and more how these things are encapsulated in language. Yeah, so language is absolutely key.
Sure. And so what I want to do now, I'm going to try to give a general overview. Your book is broken down into two parts, part 1 and part 2. Yeah. And it looks like part 1, you talk a lot about rites of passage. You talk about human destiny and divination, the person as multiple selves, and concepts of good and evil in ancient tradition Africa, as well as the complementary conceptions of free will and destiny. Now, I know some of the courses that you see Dr. Kambone has done, these topics are dealt with very extensively individually as subjects on their own. But what I want to kind of do, it's 2:36 now, and I know you have to go in about another 30 minutes. So what I want to do is kind of give a general overview of those topics, specifically the multiple selves, because I think at least for myself, coming from in America, unfortunately we had a lot of different religious backgrounds, but the understanding of the multiple selves is something that when we're talking about what is African, this is what we can really point to say. Like, for example, you hear a lot of people say, Islam started in Africa, Christianity started in Africa. But when we really looked at the core understanding, linguistically, culturally, and just the different concepts, we get a better idea of what is and what isn't Africa. So could you briefly explain about part 1, and then really shortly talk about the multiple selves, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. I'm pretty sure there's a lot of questions in the community.
Yes. I mean, I'm glad that you introduced the subject in that manner, because it has occurred to me that if there is a signature conception that is African, it is the conception of the person as being a multiple of selves. And this we see in traditional Africa. And as I was saying before, traditional Africa is seen as, which was previously seen as disconnected, is now seen as united when we consider ancient Kemetan ideas or ancient Egyptian ideas. Because when you look at the Egyptian ideas of the person as a multiple of selves, you then can see or make more sense of the traditional Africans in different parts of Africa having this conception of the human being a multiple of selves. In the first part of the book, I'm really looking at the person. So I'm focusing on all the aspects of the person. So, looking at the development and the individual through the rites of passage. And then in the second part, then after that, I talk about the, well, in the first part, I'm talking about the development of the social person. And in the second part, I'm talking about the person as a multiple of selves. And I'm seeing that throughout Africa, you can identify a few of these key aspects of personality which are common. And the one that stands out most, which you see throughout Africa and throughout the ancient Egyptian history, is this of the personal double. And I've already talked about Chi, Igbo, which is the Igbo conception of the personal destiny, which is known as Chi. But you can compare this with the Kla of the Ga, I think, and the Kra of the Asante. You know the personal double, which they call the Ka or the Ki in ancient Kemet. And there are many different examples of this personal double or destiny given in different languages, which I've covered in the book.
Sure.
And then, so I've really tried to identify these key aspects of personality which make up the multiple of selves, and try to show that, of course, you know, they are obviously given different names in different cultures, but you can more or less see that they are the same common aspects of the person or key aspects of the personality.
Sure.
So I've tried to identify these by giving them names. So I've talked about the destiny, I've talked about all the spiritual double, the soul or the breath, the heart, the ancestral guardian, the shadow. And to talk about these, I mean, very briefly, you know, the ancestral guardian is an aspect of each person which is inherited from their ancestors, from their parents, from their ancestors. And of course, you know, everybody has this. And it's given different names, both for the father's line and for the mother's line in different African cultures. And the shadow is a reference to the dream self, that the notion that, you know, the person also has a dimension of existence within a dreaming consciousness or dreaming state of consciousness. And this has a lot of repercussions in terms of, or even, in fact, even the whole model of the person as multiple selves has a lot of repercussions in terms of how we view mental illness and mental health and so on, and how at present, if we had an African continent where our education system was independent and so on, what kind of model would we adopt to cater for the mental health of our citizens? Would we not look at something like this? Because when you look at just even aspects like the dream self, and you think of the fact that dreams are a way of processing the things which happen in our waking life, you can see, and also that when you look at the fact that the fastest route to loss of mental health is lack of sleep. And if you think, well, if the fastest route to, you know, losing mental health or is lack of sleep, then what's the factor involved? Well, what do you do when you don't sleep? You don't dream. You don't dream. So it's telling us that dreams are an important part of our maintaining a healthy existence, maintaining a healthy continuity in our lives. And African philosophy or African psychology has recognized this. So would it not be more sensible for us in a liberated Africa to be adopting our own model of psychology to look at mental health and issues like that? So basically, that's why I've talked about mental health at the end of the section of that part of the book. But I was basically trying to explain these key aspects of personality, which make up the multiple of self.
Sure.
The heart, seen as the thinking and feeling self, for instance, that basically, in African ideas, exemplified by Igbo and other ideas and Egyptian ideas, that thinking and feeling are not seen as connected disconnected things. They're seen as being one and the same. In a sense, the person does their thinking with their heart. You see, and you can give an example of somebody who's driving and they're not paying attention. And in Igbo, you could say a phrase like "Ona gaje ma obia onunga," which is to say he's driving, but his heart is not there. So what they're saying is that his mind is not there, but we use the term heart instead of mind, but we mean the same thing. We mean that his concentration and focus is there, but it involves his heart as well as his mind. So when I talk about the thinking and feeling themselves, I'm talking about the heart. I'm not talking purely about emotions when I'm talking about the heart in African belief systems. Sure. I'm talking about thoughts also. And these are aspects of thought which you can find similar to in Dogon, in ancient Egyptian thought. And Brother Carruthers wrote his final book about this aspect of thinking. Jacob Carruthers, that is.
So we have a couple questions.
So basically, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, I was saying, Dr. Kamalu, it's about quarter of. I know you have to go. We have a couple questions coming in that I want to kind of pose to you. A couple of them typed in the chat. I'll start with the latest one first and walk backwards. When you have to go, let me know, and we'll of course honor your time. The first question actually came from, I'm reading from last to first, going backwards. The first question came from actually Dr. Obadore Kambone. He asks, if you had to distill the core element of African thought to one thing, concept, or idea, what would it be? You understand the question?
Oh, yeah. What would it be? The core idea. I think it would be the idea that there is a singular essence of divinity within everything. Is this notion of the notion of chi and ka. I'm talking about ka in the ancient Kemetic ideas and chi in Igbo ideas, or the sei and mawu, as I described in the book. So if you can take ideas like that in different cultures, in different languages in Africa, you can see that this notion of the divinity as within, immanent, and also transcendent. I think because from that idea, there are connected many, many other ideas. So if we have to talk about the creation, then that is the root also of creation. But it's very hard to do that in one, to choose one concept.
Okay. The next question I'm reading here backwards. It says that came from our sister Teresa. She says, do those who currently practice various African belief systems see the commonality and connections of all the other belief systems, or do they primarily recognize only their own and dismiss the others?
I would say people only recognize their own and generally don't have an interest in others. People also, there's a lot of influence of other belief systems which are not African or traditional African. So they are prominent, more prominent than our traditional African belief systems. So I would say, yeah, definitely people will only be concerned with their own if they have any knowledge of their own traditional belief systems.
Yeah, you know, and you just brought to my mind something that we always discuss on AbibitumiKasa, the forum itself, is this notion and idea of forward or backwards but never cross. In other words, we look forward to, you know, so quote unquote the West, or backwards to a colonial, but we never look across continent for ideas and implement ideas across continent. So that's one of the things that you just triggered to my mind. I had one more question, came from our sister Althea. Actually, it was the first question. Her question centers around the term yoga and how it relates to African linguistics and our spiritual systems, if you have any knowledge of that.
No, I don't, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have any knowledge of yoga.
Okay, so I actually want to read another quote. I know it's getting close. I want to read another quote that relates to, okay, I got another question just came in. I'm sorry, from Nana Kambo. She writes, very interested in the concept of mental health. You talked a little bit about mental health and dreams. How do you see a practitioner, a healer, psychologist developing this notion that you talked about, the dreams?
Well, I mean, it is sort of, I can answer it by sort of talking further about the rest of the first part of the book, which deals with the person, because as well as you know, looking at the person as multiple selves, we have to look at the practitioner. The practitioner in traditional African society will often use divination. So that's why in this part of the book, I deal with number, destiny, and divination. And one of the aspects of personality, which is very important in the, the collection of personality, the collection of aspects of the personality, is the destiny. And so destiny is key. Because of that, when the practitioner is delivering the treatment, there is an interest in divination, because divination can help to guide in advising people, depending on the outcome of the divination process. So the divination process is therefore, just talked about in the book for that reason. Can you remind me again just what she was saying again? Sorry.
So I actually wanted to read so related to Nana Kambo's question. Dr. Kambo? So related to So related to Nana Kambo's question, I wanted to read a couple of chapters in the book that speak directly to the psychology. You have chapter 3, Number, Destiny, and Divination, you talked about, and one of the chapters in there talks about freedom and moral destiny. Another section talks about investigations in modern psychology and psychiatry, conclusions. You also talked about, dream body or shadow as evident in lucid, dream, and out-of-body experiences. So the book itself does go into just how this relates in the first part of the book, psychology and psychiatrists and treatments of such.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I wanted to read one last section that's related to this from the book. It says, the idea of the person in African thought is not that of Western psychology, where he, she is seen as a single entity or just mind and body. He or she is seen as a collective spiritual and physical entity. So I wanted to read that portion from the book that you related to us. I don't see any more questions, so it's about 5 minutes till. I wanted to ask maybe one last question before we wrap it up and kind of open it up again for questions. If you have questions, feel free to type them in, and I'll relate the questions to Dr. Kamalu. But I wanted to ask one last question here. But feel free to comment, Dr. Kamalu, as I look for the question I want to ask.
Yeah. I was just going to say.
Very picky which one I want to ask while I have you on the call. So
right. Sure. So, but I was going to wrap it up by just saying that the first part deals with the persons. So every aspect of the person, in a sense, trying to put themselves on the path in working towards their destiny self or towards their better self, their best self, is arrived at through all of these processes, through first of all being aware of this aspect of the personality, and through being able to consult a practitioner who is able to perform divination, and at the same time, there is this question of whether the destiny is a final kind of thing, in the terms of that the personality is determined, finally and permanently, or whether if somebody has the willpower, can they in some way alter that destiny? And that's why I have to talk about free will and determinism. In a sense, because we're working in a Western environment, I have addressed some of the issues that are really the subject matter of all philosophy, whether it's African, whether it's Western, whether it's Asian, and so on. And therefore, I've had to look at the question of people, and also have to look at the way in which African people, what is their perspective, if you will, in determinism. Because how Africans see the destiny self does not necessarily have the same kind of finality that it might have in Western ideas. For example, the Igbo have a saying that if a person is determined, then their chief will follow them. So it's almost saying, like, if you have incredible determination, somehow your chief will follow you. So it's not giving an absolute kind of situation.
Okay. All right. So thank you for that.
But at the same time, I was going to say that I should have said that also, that the Africans see free will and determinism as compatible. That they are not seen necessarily as contradictory. That it's perfectly okay for us to be determined by events, but still we have the freedom of will, freedom of willpower.
This was actually the question I was going to ask if we still had time, and definitely I think I definitely want to invite you back to go into the second part of the book. But this last question, it relates to directly what you're speaking to now, in terms of how can we understand the difference in African thought as it relates to complementary opposites in ethics and morals from Eurasian myths and religions and beliefs. So I think you touched a little bit about just the differences in how we can understand and interpret the complementary nature of African beliefs. For example, you can't have a female principle without the male principle. We don't necessarily look at one's good, one's evil. It's that the complementary makes them whole. So
absolutely.
that's definitely one of the concepts that we touched a lot about, and Dr. Campbell himself touched a lot about in the course and the videos that he did online. So a couple of those key things we'll address if we have the pleasure or the honor to have you back to go through the second chapter of the book, second part of the book, I'm sorry, to kind of cover that. On the other side, we talked about Supreme Being, the cosmology, Earth, land. We talk about the validity of African thought in the second half of the book. So I definitely want to have the opportunity to have you back and discuss those various options and understandings more so on the second side.
Yeah. I would be grateful to come back. Actually, I'd like to come back. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, I don't see if anybody has any last questions. I'll let you finish out, Dr. Kamalu, and get the last statement, and then we'll end the session. Let me see if anybody has any last questions real quick. You can go ahead and type it. Type your questions. Okay, we're having a lot of thank yous. People saying thank you, Dr. Kamalu. Appreciate your time. Looking forward to have you back. Nana Kambon, that's Madase Power. Definitely want you back. So definitely, we have another thank you coming from Sister Teresa, Sister Nataki. So we have a lot of people that are definitely in tune to what you wrote, and we really appreciate you coming in. So Dr. Campbell, one last comment for Dr. Campbell.
Let me also relay thanks to everybody for participating in the discussion. And yes, I'll be looking forward to our next meeting.
Right. Dr. Kamalu, I did have one last question that came in. Forgive me. Dr. Campbell wrote that when my colleagues at the Institute of African Studies learned that I was teaching that there's an African worldview, some were alarmed that I was potentially essentializing diverse African peoples. What's your take? Do you understand the question?
Was essentializing or?
Yes.
How do you mean
I can unmute him if you don't understand the question.
I don't understand essentializing.
So let me try to unmute Dr. Campbell so he can ask it real quick, and I know he has to go. Dr. Campbell. Yeah, we're having. Okay, looks like we cannot get Dr. Campbell. So, what I'll do, Dr. Kamalu, I will do a follow-up to that question with you. I'll actually send an email so we can communicate back and forth via email. We can have that question answered, and I'll definitely be in touch with you to try to reschedule. I know that the new semester is coming up, and you're going to be busy.
Right. Yes.
Let me. I got a request to unmute Nataki. Okay, Sister Nataki, you're unmuted.
Yeah, I wanted to try. I think I know what Dr. Kamban was trying to ask. The way I read the question was, when my colleagues at the Institute of African Studies learned that I was teaching that there is an African worldview, which implies that there's one central or one common worldview, some were alarmed that I was potentially essentializing diverse African people, and that sounds like trying to say that we're all one somehow takes away from the diversity. And so I think it's what is his take on that?
Yeah.
That's my interpretation, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, there are diverse African worldviews, but there are common elements within those worldviews. And if we look at ancient Kemet, we see a lot of the connections. And therefore, I think it's legitimate to look at Africa as a cultural unity and look at ideas that are common, and also look at some generalize in ways that you can see that, for instance, many parts of Africa view the person as having a multiple of selves. They may have different names for those selves. They may have different numbers of those cells in different parts of Africa, but what you do see essentially is that Africans view the individual as being a multiple of selves, and that some of these, cultures show connections more readily than others. But if you look at ancient Egypt, for instance, and look at how they view some of these aspects of personality, like the car, the destiny self, and you look at that and you find that more than any other aspect of personality, you're able to find this as a common factor in many other, traditional African belief systems. You will also find aspects which correlate with the idea of the shadow, with the heart, and so on. So even though not every region will have established belief systems where these things correlate perfectly, you're able to see these patterns, these correlations, and therefore it's legitimate to observe them and to note them, that this is a signature. This is a signature of African psychology. There's no other belief system in the world that, it would seem to me, sees the person as being a collection of selves. There may be, but this is something which is quite unique about African thought systems. So things like this, you note as being common, and it's not, it's not to say that these different peoples, these different languages from which you get these ideas do not have diverse cosmologies, but you're able to find these strands which are common and which can help us essentially understand that Africans do have, conceptions or understandings of the person, of the individual, which is unique when you compare it to other parts of the world. So that's just one example. There are other examples like that.
Okay. Well, thank you, Nataki, for developing that thought further on my behalf. I appreciate that. So Dr. Kamalu.
So basically, I mean, it's not to say that there's one worldview per se. It's not to say that there are not different worldviews, but you are able to see that there are commonalities, that there are fundamental strands. Like, for instance, the idea that the world was created from some unformed material, which usually involves water, which usually involves a mix of earth or water or something like that. It's not only African; it's all over the world. But still, it's something which is there and which you have to note. So you are able to note common aspects. But that's not to say that there are not different worldviews. There is no one absolute African worldview, but you can say that these common aspects, because they're common, they do form an African worldview, because they are unique to Africa as a group.
Okay. I don't know if you have time, Dr. Kamalu. We had one last question. I'll follow up from Dr. Campbell. He says, also related to my question is the hieroglyph, Meduneter, for the word for Ma, M-A-A, which actually looks like a base foundation.
Yes, absolutely, like a pedestal. Yeah.
Right. Can you see the questions yourself, Dr. Kamalu?
Yes. I can't. Let me see if I can see it. But I think I get the gist of the question.
He says here, I worked a charm upon my heart, and I laid a foundation in Ma, from Comedic Creation Stories.
Yeah.
How does this relate to the foundation of African thought?
Well, this relates because in the beginning, the Creator created the world from sheer thought. And the pedestal in the hieroglyph is a symbol of creating a foundation for the world. The foundation stone. When you build a house, that's the first thing that you have to build in order for the rest of the house to stand. So, in a similar way, this hieroglyph is symbolic in the hieroglyphics of the foundation of the world, but not only the foundation of the world in terms of creational sense, but also in terms of the foundations of the world in terms of the beginnings of knowledge and everything like that, the beginnings of thought and so on. And this idea, I believe, you can ultimately connect to the termite hill, the primeval termite hill and ant hill, out of which the gods came. So this foundation is also found in traditional Africa. When we talk about the termite hills and ant hills, the mythology of the creation of the world in parts of Africa talk about a primeval ant hill or termite hill on which the first human beings stood, and then this termite hill was surrounded by an inundation. So you can see that there's a connection between traditional Africa and ancient Africa. But fundamentally, this hieroglyph is talking about how the world was founded, and it is also the showing that this concept of Ma'at or Ma'at is also fundamental in the organization of the world, as well as the organization of ancient Kemet society.
Okay. So what I want to do, Dr. Kamalu, we have a couple more questions coming in, but what I want to do, I'll probably field those questions offline and prepare them for the next time we have a meeting. I want to respect that you have to go and pick up your family as we talked earlier. So I'll let that be the last question, and I'll let you have the last word. And I want to say as our last word to you, welcome to the AbibitumiKasa family. We welcome you to come and join us on the forum. We do discuss topics like these on a daily basis on our forum. I'll send you the information for that. And then, so on behalf of AbibitumiKasa, we say Madase for joining us.
Madase, thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Have a good day.
Yeah. And you too. Thank you.
Bye-bye.